Good morning, good afternoon. I don't know where you are in the world, but thank you so much for joining us this evening, this morning, this afternoon. Thank you for taking time out to join Task Academy and the International Accreditation Organization for Clinical Research, IAOCR, on our Mapping the Journey to Success webinar. This is the second webinar of a three-part webinar series. And in webinar 1, we discussed diversification and democratizing clinical research. And today we have a new expert panel to tackle our second topic. And I think it's a topic that is on everybody's lips, is how to break into the clinical research industry. So I think that's a question that most of us in the industry gets a lot. And that's exactly why we're hosting this webinar, to hopefully try and tackle some of the barriers and answer your questions. In this webinar, we would like to discuss the gap that there is between the industry demand and also the workforce, and then exploring the various roles that there actually are in the industry. And what does it mean to be competent? What does it mean if the industry says you need to be fit for purpose? What are the qualifications and skills that we are looking for when you want to enter the industry? We will also talk about some of the barriers and some of our suggestions on what you can do to overcome this. And then I've also asked my panel for some practical advice and tips that they can share with each one of you as they are in the industry and working with this on a daily basis. So hopefully we can also get to that. Just before we go on, I just want to share some general house rules that will be applicable for this remainder of the webinar. So this webinar is recorded, and by continuing your attendance, we take it that you consent to the fact that you will be part of this recording. We ask that everybody be respectful to speakers and all the other participants. And then also you will be muted by the host. It's not to have you take part in this webinar. It's just for to prevent any background noise. But please feel welcome to post any of your questions in the chat box. We will attend to each and every question at the end of this webinar. And also at the end, we will allow, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a direct question to any of the panel members. And should you have any questions even after the webinar, you are more than welcome to email academy@task.org.za, and we will share the questions with the panel or answer them ourselves. So now over to introductions. For those of you who have not joined us on webinar 1, I will just first introduce myself, and then I'm going to introduce my panel. My name is Karen Klute. I have a degree in occupational therapy, and I had a private practice for a few years. After that, I went into the retail industry, and I was a buyer for a retail big group here in South Africa for about 7 years. But I really missed the healthcare science industry, and that's how I broke into the clinical research industry. I started all over again, right at the bottom, as a trainee CRA. And I worked my way up and worked there for a few years. Then I moved over to the clinical research site side, where I joined Task, and that's where I am today still. I started out as an internal monitor for our clinical research sites, and then I instituted the quality assurance department and oversee the regulatory team, and now also started Task Academy to help with my passion in teaching clinical research and helping you guys getting into the industry. On my panel today, we have Tammy Masters. She's the Director of Global Learning at Syneos, and I will ask her to introduce herself just now. And then we also have Angela Roberts. She's the Head of Recruiting Operations at CRA Resources, and Sarah Everett, Vice President of Operations at IAOCR. Tammy, welcome and thank you for joining us. And just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about yourself to all the webinar listeners.
Thank you. Thank you. So the way I started into clinical research, and by the way, my name is Tammy Masters, and just like Karen said, I'm Director of Global Learning. So what I do in my job is really run the Department for Training CRAs. So I've seen them since their training level, as Karen was, and all the way up until their clinical trial manager. I have been working at Syneos for the past 18 years doing this. I actually created this program and have kept it running and have grown it for quite a bit. I got into clinical research by a common way that a lot of people do is I was a nurse initially, and I worked in the cardiothoracic ICU over at Duke, but then I got kind of tired of the night shifts and the swing shifts and the holidays and weekends. So I wound up going into clinical research for our Department of Anesthesiology. And after that, I realized, there's just, people they get into this on the ground level, but they don't have a lot of training. So I wound up developing a training program over at UNC. And then eventually I wound up being able to transfer those skills into industry, where I worked at Syneos Health. And I am based in the United States, in Charleston, South Carolina. And yeah, and I love clinical research. I'm very passionate about it. I do have my credential through IAOCR as a clinical training manager, and that's how I met Sarah and been involved with her and her organization. And I will turn this over to you, Angela.
Thank you. And I don't know that I can follow that very well, but but as mentioned, my name is Angela Roberts, and I am actually the co-founder and managing partner of CRA Resources. And for those of you who haven't heard of us before, we have been in the industry since 2008, and we are a niche recruitment firm specializing in the recruitment of CRAs and site managers within North America. And outside of my formal education, I am a project management. I'm PMP certified, so project manager, Lean and Six Sigma as well. I actually come from IBM, so very similar stories to what a lot of the panel members are going to discuss today. Is we kind of fell into this industry, which is probably also similar stories to what a lot of you guys have done as well. And we wanted to look at this firm a little bit differently than a lot of other recruiting firms, because we wanted to focus more on doing the right thing and be a firm that focused more on competency and helping to drive the competency within this industry, because we feel like that's critically important, not just how many years you've done it, but how good you are at it, and then to also help to better define competency, not just within the CRA space, but in all of the other spaces within this industry as well.
Thank you, Angela. And last but not least, Sarah.
Hi. Thank you, Karen. Hello. As you know, I'm Sarah Everett, VP of Operations at IAOCR. For those who don't know about IAOCR, we are the International Accrediting Organization for Clinical Research. We were established in 2011, and we were the first organization to lead global initiatives in developing core competencies for clinical research professionals. I'm based in York in the UK, and I joined IAOCR 2 years ago as the VP of Ops, and I work with my team and global industry leaders to develop and manage accreditation programs that verify competence, either at an individual or workforce or organizational level. So, similar to the others, how did I get here? Well, I've worked in clinical research in a variety of roles for over 30 years, scary to say. I started my career as a research nurse with Glaxo, purely by chance. I was working as a nurse, and I wanted to know more about new drug development and preventative treatments, and how I really could support making a difference in this area to patients' lives. And then I moved into a CRA role and spent a large proportion of my time working in the CRO world with what is now IQVIA. Formerly it was Quintiles. And I worked as a CRA, a line manager, project manager, ops manager, all through the roles, working across large pharma to being head of the clinical research department there. And throughout this time, I really recognised the struggle we had in finding candidates across various clinical roles. And I moved into managing resource and recruitment in clinical research within 2 different CROs, looking at various attraction and retention strategies. So myself personally, I have a real passion to drive greater awareness and recognition of clinical research as a profession, and really a desire as an industry to have global best practices and competence verification and standards that can be recognised so that we can become world-class professional workforce teams and make this a real excellent choice for careers. So I'm really delighted to be here today. It's great to see so many people of you joining us, and I really hope this will be an engaging and informative webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that is exactly why us 4 is on the panel, because we share the passion for the industry and we have a shared vision and mission to make this industry, to professionalize it, and to help build a competent workforce. So thank you so much for each and every one of you to join us to talk about this today. I think as a backdrop to this discussion, I just want to maybe touch on some data and statistics before we head off. The global clinical trial market size was actually valued at about $50 billion in 2022. And it's still expected to expand at a compound annual growth rate of about 5.8% from this year to 2030. So you might feel this is a booming industry, which is true, but contradictory to this fact, and I think the panel will agree with me that there's something on the other flip side of this coin, and that is that there's a widening gap between the demand in the industry and the supply, and especially in the supply of a competent workforce. And that's exactly what each and every one of you have stated. So the workforce is declining and the demand for clinical research professionals exceeds the supply. And this is a trend that we keep on seeing continuing, and that is exactly what we want to address today. So in a recent Sage journal article that I read, it was by Dr. Stephanie Friel and some of her colleagues, and it was now recently in June 2023, where they wrote about now is the time to fix the clinical research workforce crisis. And in this article, they also discussed the gap between supply and demand and from a competent workforce. So this is really a theme that is a buzzword in clinical research, and it's the more we talk about it, the more it's known, the more we fight for this to become a profession and to fight for the competency, the importance of competency, and we will speak later about what exactly that means. But this crisis actually has now a multi-layer impact on the industry as a whole. So it's almost like a snowball effect. And on this slide, I just quickly want to run you through this snowball effect that this workforce crisis actually has on the industry. So due to the fact that the workforce is declining, but the industry is growing, the current workforce actually experience a lot of burden, an overburden of work, too much work, little resources, complex protocols, and we see actually a higher resignation rate. And this calls for a war of talent, actually, that is going on in the industry, where we see poaching of workforce, actually also staff that is site-based are getting lured away to rather go and work at the bigger pharma and CRO companies because there's better pay and maybe better prospects. But this now dilute the workforce staff at our sites. And this makes that the whole industry suffers, because sites are the backbone that we need to do clinical trials. And that is where our participants are. And if our site workforce is not competent, then again, it impacts on the quality of a clinical trial and the compliance of that trial, and also the integrity of the data. And all of this then impacts in clinical research as a whole, and will have a direct impact on the medical progress. So that is the essence of why we need a competent workforce, why we need to get new people into the industry and really train them up well to address this workforce crisis. Angela, I want to maybe pose a question to you. You are the head of recruiting operations at CRA Resources, as you just introduced yourself. Do you agree with this snowball effect of a declining workforce? Have you experienced a shortage in talent in your pool of applicants at your agency?
I will say yes, and I will say no. So I think there's a couple of things that we're seeing that is going on. And the first, I love Dr. Frill's article, because the fact that she did focus on the site, and it does all start there. And one of the biggest things that we're seeing is a huge push of seriously underqualified candidates who are applying for senior CRA positions. And I believe that points to two issues predominantly that haven't been addressed, that I hope do become addressed at some point in the very near future. Is, first off, I think that a lot of individuals take positions at the site not just because they love it. I mean, hopefully there are a lot who do, and they're passionate about it, the difference that they're making within the industry. But I think a lot of individuals feel like it's a stepping stone to take a site level position because they want to become a CRA. And what we're seeing is that because there's not a clear barrier to entry or a pathway for individuals to become a site manager or a clinical research associate within the industry, individuals they just take the path that they know the best might get them there. I guess it's not a very graceful way to say it, but a lot of times coordinators will do that. They'll take a coordinator position. In a couple of months, they'll start applying for CRA positions. And it's unfortunate, because the sites really need individuals that are going to stick at the site and learn and become stronger at the site and really make a difference there. Not that there's anything wrong with moving from coordinator position to a CRA role. We love that. We love to have CRAs that have that experience. But if the only reason that they're taking those positions is to step into a CRA role, I think that's a flawed approach. And I think if we can better define the pathway to become a CRA, whether it's via a site or through other methods, I think that will help a lot of that poaching and the burden of the movement and the resignation that goes from one path to the other. The other thing that I see a lot of, though, is because our industry is so burdened and the supply and demand has become such a large issue, is that there are a lot of organizations and individuals out there that are taking advantage in a bad way, and there's a lot of fraudulence. There's a lot of fake individuals. They represent their CRAs. They're not. There's organizations. I just became aware of another one a couple of weeks ago. That's a formal organizations. They take money from people to teach them how to pass CRA interviews. They provide them with resumes that show they've got 16 years experience. They give references to them. They help provide background verifications. They do all these things. And these individuals worked for Verizon before. They don't have any experience in the industry. And that's causing a huge, significant issue within our industry for the sponsors and the CROs that are hiring them, because they sound great, they interview great, they pass the competency assessments, and it takes a lot of effort to be able to identify that they're not real until they get out, and then the managers, if they're really watching the shop, realize they're not real, but then you have to start all over again. So the cost associated with the turnover rates due to that and the churn and all of that is pretty significant also. So if you're looking at, if I'm a hiring manager for an organization and I have a CRA position out there, on average, we're seeing 400 or 500 applicants for a CRA position, my sourcers will tell you that at least 60% of them are fake. And then on top of that, I would say another 20% of those are seriously underqualified, not minorly underqualified, but seriously underqualified. And due to the romance of the CRA position, I think a lot of individuals aren't really sure what CRAs do. I just had an individual that applied for a position that has a wonderful foundation in research. Wonderful. Henry Ford, he's been there for 5 years. Fantastic. Argued with me over the fact that he thought he was ready for a senior CRA position, zero industry experience at the CRA level. And I think that confusion is causing a lot of barriers as it relates to what we're trying to accomplish here.
Well, you really tackle the bull by the horns there. So thank you for your open and honesty. We need to hear these things, and we need to hear what's happening in the industry. And we need to, I think, from the student perspective, make sure also about the organization that you go to, that that organization is actually accredited and is not taking you for a ride. So also do your homework on where you apply for, or the people that help you to get an application. Tammy, now over to you. I went to the Syneos Health website, and on that day that I actually was on your website, I found about 325 positions advertised. What is your view on this demand and supply issue in the industry, from your view as the Director of Global Learning at Syneos? And how easy or how difficult is it for you to find, like we heard now from Angela, the correct candidate, and maybe share some of the criteria that you will be looking for when you want to hire someone?
Right. It is a challenge, quite definitely. And I think every single CRO runs into this as well. And as Angela was talking about, when you get these poaching, then the CRAs are actually, when they get the experience, are pricing themselves out of the market. So what we have done, and what several other of our competitors have also done, is recognize that there are qualified individuals out there. Quite often, we have to hire to what the sponsors want. So that is, in and of itself, is a challenge. We are, as the industry, I think, by highlighting the credentialing of the program, we are bringing more insight to our sponsors that you don't necessarily have to have a 4-year degree along with 2 years of experience. Because if you can go through a program that educates you and then helps you define competency, like Sarah and Task do, that we have to change it. The sponsors are starting to learn that they can have confidence. So, for example, at my company, obviously we recognized that this was an issue, and it was an opportunity for us to develop our own internal program. And I think that is something that's important for you all to look for, is not only coming in with some type of validation and training of your skill set, like with Task Academy and IAOCR, but also looking at a company that shares those values as well. So we developed an entry-level CRA training program, and we worked with IAOCR to align our training to their competencies. And that has been like a big turn in the industry. There has never been like competencies defined for CRAs like when I got into the industry, 20, 25 years ago. So that's what people like Sarah and Angela, we're so passionate about knowing what a CRA should do, because we are dictated by regulations. So we need to set competencies. So we did develop a training like that. We partnered with IAOCR so that once our entry-level CRAs went through the program, we could confidently say that they achieved, an entry-level degree of competency, which really, really helps with our sponsors. And that's one of the things that's really important, is, helping drive that dialogue with them, that you can, have a 2-year degree, but, you can still be competent in CRA skills. And I think it's important for individuals who are coming into a company to have, some type of education in it or training in it. It doesn't have to be a formal education, but to at least come in with some idea of what the language is. What are we doing? How do you speak the talk, you know? And then one of the other things that we have found is that there's also a high demand for specialized CRAs. And for our company, those are oncology CRAs. And that it makes it, the oncology CRAs are almost the golden unicorn in the industry for having that level of experience. So at our company, we also recognize that people that knew about oncology but didn't necessarily know about clinical research were also valuable as well. So, or had, let's just say, clinical monitoring experience. So we started an academy to upskill even our entry level CRA. So that's how we're trying to tackle the issue. But again, I think what's really important is changing the industry standard of having a set and defined level of education and training and experience. And that's what we're all together working towards. And thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Tammy. I absolutely agree. And that is exactly what Task Academy is also aiming to do. We support what you said just now. We, as industry people, having training courses, we need to be the people that go against this thumb rule of 1 to 2 year experience. We need to show by the quality of our courses with accreditation and competency outcome that it's not needed anymore. If someone goes through our type of courses, you know, that they know that a Syneos Health CRA is equal to, you know, somebody that has experience, or if you went through this Task Academy course accredited by IAOCR, you know that person was found competent, and by that we, as a front of trainers, want to stand up for the new generation and get that out of the way. So I absolutely agree with that, and we need to do that together. So thank you for that insight. That was very valuable. Sarah, you're the Vice President Operations of International Accreditation Organization, IAOCR. Just also to you, do you also feel this workforce crisis, and what do you think are the reasons for that?
Yeah, Karen, I definitely think we're facing a huge workforce crisis in clinical research, and it's been steadily growing for years. And I think now we've really reached that tipping point between the supply and demand, as you mentioned earlier. And as we all know, there is an unprecedented development in new treatments. They're much more complex, much more detailed, and need certain skills as well. But yeah, we do find ourselves in this candidate scarce market, and it is going to have a devastating impact on research and the speed at which we can bring drugs to market if we don't change the way we currently take people into clinical research. We all know it's a highly regulated industry, but as I mentioned earlier, it's not recognized as a profession. So at the heart of this workforce crisis is the fact that people working in clinical research have no clear professional identity. And as you mentioned earlier, Karen, post-pandemic, we know lots of people change their lifestyles, they change their choice of working roles, and people have felt that effect of burnout, the working the long hours, supporting new treatments, particularly vaccines. And this has impacted those who are still working in the industry, but also it's resulted in that high turnover, as you said. And I think, you know, that's just further increased the problem that we're now seeing. So what is it we could do? What can we change? And I think what we need to do is hearing what Angela was saying and Tammy's saying, is really developing that globally recognized professional career pathway across all clinical roles. So it's not just CRAs we're talking about. So really to address this gap, and focus on retaining those people who are really good at what they do, because there is a great workforce out there. And yes, we do have these people who are coming in who may not be quite as good as perhaps they think they are, but we really need to respect and value that resource that we currently have. And I think a bigger issue that we have, and we all know, is that clinical research is rarely discussed in schools. So people don't really know this career pathway or profession. And I think, like all of us on the call, we've all found ourselves falling into this industry purely by chance. And then we realize that all the things we do in the role are things we really enjoy, you know, especially working to enhance patient health and bring more effective treatments and better outcomes for patients. And I think equally, there are some universities that offer degrees in clinical research, but there aren't that many. And when students are getting to the stage where they need to make those selections, it's not really being promoted. So I think in honesty, people don't really know that much about clinical research, which is incredible given, we've come through a pandemic and clinical research has really driven things for us. But I would say, sadly, people really know nothing of the vast network of dedicated professionals who play such an integral part in driving medical knowledge and treatments. So promoting clinical research at a younger age, to me, is key to understand and make clinical research a career of choice and attract more people into industry. And I think as an industry, what we need to look at is how we attract that talent out there. There are people keen and ready with transferable skills who could move into many different clinical research roles. But what we need to do is create that door in. We need to create that pathway of training and competence verification and standardization globally to allow people to do that.
Thank you, Sarah. And that is exactly why Task Academy and IAOCR has joined forces, because that is what we want to do. And if we're not starting to do it, somebody has to do it. Somebody needs to create this career pathway. Somebody needs to be there at the end, verifying the competency so that we can help people get into this research. But there's something else that you mentioned here, and I think that's a very important fact that I want to touch on in this webinar is we need to acknowledge that there are roles beyond CRA. And there's actually a vast network of dedicated professionals that work in this industry. If I can just get that slide up, Gareth, thanks. So there is an article in the Lancet where the author just said that having worked in clinical trials for 25 years, I have no doubt that the part that determines success or failure is the part between protocol development and data analysis. So what that means is that I think the attendees and persons and people hearing about clinical trials needs to understand that there is stages in a clinical trial, and for each stage of that trial, there are people needed to get this trial from beginning to end. We start with protocol development, and then there's this whole section in between that it refers to where everything happens from where a site is selected to take part and all the startup in that, where it's approved and reviewed by ethical board and regulatory authority. The whole trial is set up by a team in the background. Then there's recruitment. Then there's trial conduct, quality management, and that is where your monitoring actually only comes in. And then there's a trial closeout. And at the very end, we still have to write the clinical report and disseminate the results. So there are so many positions available. So on the next slide, I just want to quickly touch on the career opportunities that there actually is in clinical research. And it's not as easy as it is on the slide to say exactly this before and exactly during and exactly after, because some of these roles move from the before into the during and sometimes into the after. But if we need to put it into a category, there are biotechnicians needed in the development phase of a study. We need medical writers to put this whole science protocol together, biostatisticians that need to analyze previous data, look into the future, and make hypothesis of what can happen if we go further. Clinical data programmers is needed. We have people working as financial managers in clinical research because they need to understand protocols. They need to set up a budget for the CRO and the sponsor to work in clinical trials. We have people in as regulatory assistants, regulatory specialists. There's industrial pharmacists working with getting the investigator product at the sites. Then when we get to the site and during the trial, we have recruitment people. We have community advisory board members that works in the community trying to get the participants to participate in clinical trials. At the site and at the CRO, we have clinical trial assistants. There's people looking after drug safety, and the more electronic and technical advanced clinical trials are getting, the more we have centralized roles. There's people that look at the databases on a centralized format and system to identify what's happening to the safety. And at the very end, again, we have our statistical analysis people, and again, medical writers that needs to write up the report. And then, of course, we have your doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and any other health science degree that can also work in clinical research and then also become a CRA. So there are many roles that we need to understand, that we need all of them to do clinical research. Just to note that in that roles, it's not always needed that all these people need to have good clinical practice. It's depending on your role, depending on your exposure, but Task Academy also has a support course. And I think it's extremely important for these support roles to also have a course in clinical research. Because, for example, if you're a financial manager, you need to set up a budget, and somebody tells you, so how many are you going to pay for screen failures? And you as a financial manager doesn't understand the language and say, well, what's a screen failure? So I think it was Tammy or Angela that said, if you have a candidate in front of you and at least the one can speak the language and the jargon and knows what clinical trials are about, you will for sure go for that candidate above the one that just has a GCP but doesn't really they can't really speak to the implication of how to apply GCP. Sarah, I think just another question to you. We touched on it before, and I think another barrier that we cannot deny, we talked about the complexity of clinical trials and the need for competency and staff. So what should you say is, maybe address what is competency? What do we mean in our industry if we say you need to be competent? And maybe talk about some of the competency frameworks that IAOCR has developed.
Sure, yeah. And as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, IAOCR developed competency frameworks that map competencies to roles and are used to describe the knowledge and skills and behaviours that are required for specific job roles. So you may ask, why is competence so important to clinical research? So we all know that research on human subjects is highly regulated, using legal frameworks and guidelines. And this helps us to ensure that ethical standards are maintained to protect patients and produce valid and credible data. Organisations that work in clinical research, as we all know, have processes and procedures, including SOPs. And this is part of their quality management systems to comply with the requirements that they have for appropriate regulations and guidelines. But it's equally important that people who implement these processes and procedures are fully competent in their use. So it's critical because this helps to protect the rights and well-being of clinical research subjects and also the integrity of the data. So when we're looking at the slide here, we look at the competencies that define the standard of performance and for the specific job roles, the core competencies for a role that include the technical and non-technical. And I think for those who are not so used to hearing these words, technical is really the what of performing a job. So you would maybe think filling in a monitoring report or when to report an adverse event. The non-technical would be more around your communication skills, your leadership skills, decision-making skills, situation awareness skills. That's the kind of thing that we're really looking at there. So it's just important, and I know it's nice to know what those are, and really helps ahead of going for an interview. So I think it's just helpful to be really clued up about what it is within a clinical research role people look for from a competency perspective. And obviously, if you're thinking across the board for clinical research, you'd be looking at having a good understanding of regulatory and ethical knowledge, research design, methodology, scientific and medical information. And if you think about those non-technical that we talked about, that would be really having good skills such as excellent communication, attention to detail, written skills, time management, teamwork, collaboration, all the skills that perhaps you may have in a current role that you could transfer over into a role in clinical research. So competences are a range of standards that assess individual or collective work performance, and how we develop our competencies are across the industry. We don't just pluck them out of the sky. It's not something that IAOCR do. It's really important to understand that these are developed with industry leaders globally. And we work together to develop these standards. We build a framework and then develop these competencies across the industry. And when we delivered this last framework it was really the most comprehensive framework we've worked on. And we worked with industry and developed it with the industry, and it's for the industry. And really what that does is ensures the gold standard and reduces that risk to patients and trial data. So it's really, really critical to have good, strong, competent standards.
Thank you so much for that. Tammy, maybe a question to you. What do you think is the key skills and competencies that you would look for in an interview if somebody comes to interview with Syneos?
Okay. Well, again, we have to go, unfortunately, with a lot of what the sponsor requirements are. And in general, it does require okay, but there are a lot of different positions. So let me start with CRA. So we'll talk about the CRAs, the clinical monitors. We also, as Karen mentioned earlier, since we're working with data now, so much like a data lake and having all of this data come in lifetime now, we're also looking at central monitoring as well. So those are kind of complementary roles. But one of the things that is helpful is to having some type of scientific background. Now we have on rare instances have had somebody come through that did not have a scientific background, but we are looking for something like that. And I think that, working with it, if you don't have that, if you're not in that situation, but you are still interested in this, working with Task Academy to get some type of background on it. So we know that you've at least have some idea what's going to go, what's going to happen. We're also, of course, if you go as a coordinator and you have that experience, you're always going to be highly desirable. But that's not the only position in clinical research. The central monitors are basically data analysts. If you have a background in data or you really like data, that's another opportunity to get in. Medical writing is really good. I have a friend that runs a medical writing department in one of the bigger pharmaceutical companies, and he said part of it is just having the interest, and he can teach you how to be a medical writer, but to have that interest in it. So it depends on what you're looking for. Looking at what skills you have, just like what's been mentioned earlier, like what kind of qualities, what kind of soft skills do you have already in your job? What are the things that you're doing right now that can translate to those positions? Now, once we get people in our program, I think as Angela will back me up, it's getting in there. Most companies will provide additional training on, right? More than just like an orientation to the company, but this is more like, let's work on those skill sets. And especially if you are going for a company that has a developmental program, and I would strongly advise you that when you are looking at different places to apply, or starting maybe those interest interviews, that you ask them what they can do for you. Because if they have an entry level position, this means that they're open to someone with maybe a non-traditional background, but it also tells you that they value growth and development. Quite often, I can tell you that what we have seen is that our individuals that come through our basic CRA training program, we retain them for quite a bit because they understand that we are a company that is interested in your development. It's much easier, of course, as a company to keep somebody that you have instead of hiring somebody new. So for a company, it's actually, has an advantage. But I think for you, that would be something really good to look at. And then to, as a candidate, ask the questions that matter for you. Like, what type of training program? How do I know that I'm going to be prepared enough when I get released on the job that I know what I'm doing? And, as we've talked about before, the CRA skill set can be pretty varied, and you want to make sure that they're preparing you to do a job that you're going to be happy and comfortable in. So when we do ours, we have a combination of different learning. We have asynchronous, which is your self-paced training, where you do maybe some background training, like that's the theory. If you've taken courses with the Task Academy, they may be similar information, which, reinforcement is great because then you understand it even more. And then we start what we call functional training, which is teaching you the skills and the technical skills, the functional skills to get that job done. And those things could be things like Sarah had mentioned, SAE reporting. You could be looking at investigational product accountability. We're looking at visit report writing. That's a separate skill set as well. So we train on all of those. And in the end, once you finish that program, we give you a pretty comprehensive assessment so we can make sure that you're not just like guessing at the answers that, like a multiple choice test could be, that you're actually expressing your thoughts, opinions, and knowledge on a topic. So we can say, hey, that's a great answer. We know that you fully understand what you're doing at this point. So then, in addition to that, and I think most companies do this too, is once they have a CRA, they do training in the field, and then they go and they evaluate that individual's actual competency on site before we release you. So it's a 360 program. You're getting the basics, and then you're going through training, and then you're demonstrating that you have it. And I think that's really important in a company if you are looking for a career path. I think it's really important because that also will continue on as you grow in your career. And back to you, Karen.
Thank you, Tammy. That is very, very valuable advice. And I've never thought about it that way, is to also, where you go for your application, it's very true. If there's a starting position, then it's actually, it's their responsibility to take your hand and show you how they will ensure that you are competent when you are after the training. That's very valuable advice. Angela, I think also because, you are with CRA Resources, you do interviews on a daily basis. You see a lot of candidates. You specifically now mostly recruit for CRAs and site managers, but just share with us the qualifications and skills and competencies, or how do you tackle this process, and what do you look for in these candidates?
I'll be happy to. I will say too, to Tammy's point, whenever we're recruiting, we see a lot of mass exoduses from a lot of companies, but Syneos does retain their CRAs very well. And so they obviously do a very good job of making them feel very welcome and giving them that career path. And I do have a couple of slides, but as he brings those slides up, what I want to talk to begin with is what Sarah discussed, is the fact that we do focus very much on the competencies from a perspective of the hard skills. And we do a thorough assessment of those competencies and because we focus on those individuals who already have experience, our clients hire us to recruit senior CRAs. Very rare that we recruit or hire to recruit less than a senior, occasionally, you know, the CRA 2 level. But with that expectation of them already having that experience, our competency base isn't just the assessment of, you know, your knowledge of, you know, GCP and, you know, essential documents and, you know, the basics that individuals can memorize and learn, which I think is a great foundation, but also from a behavioral perspective of talk to me a little bit about, and then, you know, being able to dig into some of their experiences within the clinical research industry and, you know, issues they've had to address and endpoints that they've had situations with, et cetera, to really start digging into not only their knowledge of the basics, but how they've applied it within the industry. But the slides that we have here also focus more on the soft skills, and Sarah talked a little bit about that as well, as not just the technical skills, but, you know, the soft skills. And it starts at the beginning of when someone applies to us. And, you know, we could talk about resumes, and there's resume writers out there and all of that, and we can also talk about beautiful formatting and those types of things, but the devil gets into the details whenever you really start talking about a resume. Is not just about the tasks and the skills and the qualifications, but whenever we're looking at individuals that we want to represent, we want to read their resume like we would read a novel. I want to hear their story. And you can see a story in a resume. Sometimes the story is very disorganized, and sometimes it's very clear. You know, it shows that someone is in control of their career and what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And, you know, and this has been mentioned, their passion, you know, in their industry. They're here because they want to be here, because they want to make a really big difference. So, you know, of course, we can talk about formatting and the content and all of that type of thing. But, you know, one thing I would tell this audience is recruiters scare pretty easily. And Tammy, I would say that you probably say this at your juncture too, whenever you're looking at entry level. Yeah, scare pretty quickly, you know. So it starts with the initial interaction, your email address. You know, be careful of what you call yourself and your email address. You know, I get drunk on Saturday night.com is not probably a really good email address. You know, you really want to present your best light in every situation. Objectives, if you have an objective, first of all, probably don't want to have one, but make sure it's a clear objective and that it helps to tell your story. You know, if you have gaps in your career or in your education, that's not a problem, but let's talk about it. Let's be open and let's explain why those gaps are there. And if you, to Sarah's point, you know, you could have been in another industry. Tammy, I'm sure you look at this too. High school teachers, great soft skills to be used in the clinical research industry. So, you know, how you portray what you've done in the past and how it's going to make you successful in the future is critically important. You know, we call the resume can be either lazy or crazy. You know, and lazy resumes can have a lot of repetition, and they're just tasks and maybe a copy and paste of the job description, and, you know, maybe there's spelling or grammar or formatting issues, content that's not really relevant, a lot of short tenures where you decided things got tough and you left. Be cognizant of the story that you're really wanting to tell, because that's what I care about whenever I'm looking at the resume, and that's what my team members do too. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more as well about what we're looking for, because one of the things that I don't think that candidates realize, but on average, and there's been research for this, a recruiter or a hiring manager is only going to spend about 7 seconds on your resume before they decide whether or not to move forward or to abandon and go on to someone else. So when you're actually applying, make sure it's more than just your resume. You want to have a buttoned up LinkedIn profile. You want to look like you have a personal brand. You want to make sure that what is on social media is actually representing you in a really good light. You want to network and then network some more, but be real about it. You know, I get contacts all the time. I actually had one yesterday. All it says is hi. I don't really know what you want me to do with that. I mean, there's not much that I can do with that. You know, sometimes I get contacts that just says, help me. I don't know what you want me to do with that either. You know, you want to get into real discussions with real people. You want to share your story, your goals, and your ambitions, because that is where you're going to be able to progress. You're talking to a Tammy or an Angela or a Sarah or a Karen. You want to explain why you care about this industry, because we care about this industry. And if you can forge that relationship through a networking potential, that is going to win you more than a really pretty glossy resume will. And so again, recruiters scare easily. So when you're applying to positions, follow the directions. Do not sidestep them. If you sidestep directions or try to shortcut, the impression that it gives me is you're going to do the same thing whenever you're on site. And we want to make sure that you can follow the directions. Heavily regulated industry. Can you follow the directions? Can you communicate professionally? Are you responsive? Are you proactive in your communications? Treat your recruiters like the hiring managers. You know, the way you speak to me is the way I think you're going to speak to the site, or the way I think you're going to speak to your team lead or your ops manager. It's important that every interaction is extremely buttoned up and professional. Again, you don't want to embellish. Be very honest about where you are and where you want to go. Be prepared for your interviews. I think Gareth is going to show some resources at the end of the deck that gives you some links on how you can prepare for those interviews. But that's really important too. Know about the company that you're going to be speaking with, what their mission is, be able to explain why you want to work with them. All of those types of things that I think are really important that will be able to highlight your soft skills, because you can be weak in understanding every box to tick whenever it comes to doing source data verification. But if you have the passion and your soft skills are really polished, people are going to take a chance on you because they know that you care and that you can move forward very swiftly.
Well, that was incredible, invaluable tips. And I really hope that people listened and took notes. And yes, we are recording the session. So I've seen that some of the people here in South Africa have load shedding. So don't worry, we will send out the webinar to all of you so that you can have this at the tip of your finger. So thank you so much for that. We are running a little bit over time. So people that need to log off, you can log off, but we have so much to share still. So we're going to try and continue within the next 15 minutes to end this. So I think we have concurred that it is us that needs to stand up for the industry and ensure that the people we hire and the training courses we set out are of a high standard, is quality assured, and works towards professionalizing the industry by accreditation. And that is exactly where Task Academy also fits into this picture. And if we can just get that slide up maybe of Academy, I just want to quickly show the people what the type of learning is that we do. So our motto is no death by PowerPoint. So we really will not bore you with PowerPoint slides and just lots and lots of text. We use simulation training. We actually have, because we linked to Task that has 5 research sites, we use real life scenarios, simulation activities where the CRA visit the site, they pull the file, there's a mock protocol, mock source, where they identify protocol deviations, identify adverse events. There's a whole setup. How do you set up a clinical trial? What do you get in the pharmacy? It's really an interactive journey. And this course was independently quality assured by IAOCR. They walked the path with us. We developed it together. And this is what we are actually also promoting in this webinar series, is that when you do this course, when you apply for this course, we also is going to have one lucky winner, but that we announce, that can actually attend this Foundations and Beyond, the clinical research journey at Task Research Academy, and then also go directly to, I think we have load shedding now, but the generator would start, and then you would go directly into doing the accreditation exam with IAOCR. Maybe for the sake of time, we can quickly go to Sarah, where she just tell us more about the benefits of, if you actually go this route, if you do a qualified training and you go for accreditation and you are certified as a qualified clinical research professional, what does that mean for you? Does it really set you apart?
Sure. My next slide, I can take you through that, but I think there are so many benefits to being accredited as being competent. And obviously the professional recognition is huge. Certificate of accreditation that evidence that international recognition for the qualified professional status. It is a very robust process, and to achieve that is a real positive outcome. Accreditations are all mapped to the International Standard Classification of Education, which is developed by UNESCO. So it's recognized by education establishments and employees, not just locally, but globally. And then receiving that professional certification mark with a unique professional registration number and that award of designatory letters. And I think, as we've talked about earlier, this really differentiates you in the employment market and really will help to increase your employability by demonstrating that gold standard in competence without that 2-year barrier. And I think a really positive benefit as an individual is also having that increased confidence in your own competence, knowing that you've accomplished accreditation in your work. It really increases your own self-belief and motivation and helps to create more sort of proactive problem-solving self-esteem. It really, I think, it empowers people and makes them more keen to develop and achieve more. So I think, as we've said, having this in such a competitive market makes a big difference. In addition to that as well, it also shows your commitment to ongoing professional development, and you can earn professional education points too. So all really positive benefits of being accredited in competence.
Absolutely. Angela, maybe just a quick 2 minutes. If there's any tips, if you went through this training, you got the accreditation, you've got the qualifications, now you're there at the interview, you are a competitive job seeker. Any tips on that before we end the webinar?
I think that really is the tip. And I think that it's really important that, and especially from an accreditation perspective, I will sidestep just a little bit to state, for the sponsors that are on the call, that there's a lot of sponsors that still don't require certification or accreditation. But I think it's something they need to reconsider, because I see a difference in those CRAs that hold accreditations or certifications. But the one tip that I will say is that for all job seekers that are out there, when you apply for a position, don't make the mistake of thinking that that job application is just about you. You want to remember that the job application is about the company for which you're applying. And so if your application is ego focused about you and what you've done and what you've accomplished, and there is a part of that that's important, but if it's only that egocentrical, then you're going to have a hard time competing with those individuals that make it about the company for which they're applying. Oh, I really want to work for Syneos. I love your program. I'm very interested in growing within your group because of da 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 da. That's why you've got to make sure that you're prepared for the interviews. You know the companies for which you're wanting to work, and hand selecting those companies, and then going forward, because it's a partnership, it's a marriage, and you should be looking at it that way.
Absolutely. I think we're going to jump to the end. I think we had a wonderful discussion. I think we covered all the goals that we wanted to achieve. We discussed that there's a gap. We acknowledge that we need to get the workforce, the next generation, competent in their roles. And how to do that is to create good quality training material for these people. And also ensure that by certifying you as an individual, that we professionalize the industry. We need to then also stand up against these rules of a 1 to 2 year experience by showcasing that the training that we provide actually helps a person to be found competent in research. Now, just ending the webinar, and also thank you for all your tips and advice to all the people at the webinar. We will have, if you can slow the slides on the one lucky winner. So what we will do is, after this whole webinar, we will do like we do in clinical trials. we do randomization. So we will randomly select a participant from the panel that, or not the panel, from all the attendees. And within next week, we will send an email out. We will also have a PDF made with all the tips and resources, links that was provided by the panel to Task Academy. We're going to make that into a PDF document, and we will send it out to all the people that attended the call. And then we will also, in that email, announce the lucky winner that can then for free attend the Foundations and Beyond, the Clinical Research Journey course, and also go straight into accreditation by IAOCR by writing the exam. And after that, you will be found a qualified professional individual on foundation level in clinical research. After the webinar, we will send out a quick feedback form. It's just 5 questions. We would really like your input. And then also for each one of you on the call, you will get a further 10% discount on the combination program that we run with IAOCR. So if you go onto the website, www.iaocr.com, you can register for this combo package of Task Academy and IAOCR. And with this discount code, you can get a further discount to enroll yourself in the foundation course and get foundation accreditation. Let's go to the floor and see if there's any questions. People can unmute themselves if they do have questions for any of the panelists, or else we can go to the chat and I will just see if there's any questions that we can tackle. There's load shedding on their side. There's a question, what roles would then be suitable to apply for when you are just starting out in the industry? I don't know if that was answered because there's a thumb, but if you're starting out in the industry, I think we all agree that you can't go for the senior CRO role. So please don't apply. You will not get that position. So I think it's anything from a clinical trial assistant. If I talk at the site and at the CRO, that's a very good position to start at. You work with a CRA, or you work with the site staff. So you will be exposed to what they do. It's almost like they can guide you into their role. So that's a very good starting position. Any assistant position, research assistant, we also have quality assistant positions, regulatory assistant positions, data capturers at site. That's the entry-level positions that can really set you up for success. There's a final year student pursuing a bachelor's degree in human life sciences. Would an honors degree be useful to me as I try to break into and begin my career in clinical research? Or is it just better to attempt to obtain experience in the field right after earning my bachelor's degree? Angela, I see you nodding and doing things, so maybe you can answer that.
I have multiple degrees. I love it whenever people are hungry for education, but I don't know that a degree is going to get you to end game more so than a very valued certification or accreditation will and real life experience. So if you're interested in breaking into the industry, then I would recommend getting an accreditation certification and then get into the industry, do the hands-on. At some point, you have to stop having the idealistic learning mode and start getting into the let's go do it mode, because that's what people want to see. And that's the whole issue with the 2-year requirement that we're bumping our heads against now. And then I will also state that there's a lot of institutions and accreditation organizations that are not valid either. We touched on fraudulent candidates, but there's a lot of certification and accreditation programs that aren't valid. They're not industry recognized. And so don't spend your time and money on those. Spend your time and money on the valid ones, the ones that are industry recognized and that are going to gain you entry into the field, would be my advice.
I agree on that. And then maybe Tammy, you can answer, what is the difference between an associate CRA and a clinical trial assistant? We touched a little bit on that, but maybe you can just define it more.
when you talk about positions that have assistant in there, like clinical trial assistant, those are generally administrative supportive roles, right? So while the CRA may travel to the site, or they really are the site contact, the clinical trial assistant will often support the CRA. So for example, if you need more investigational product at the site, you would go through your clinical trials assistant. There is one thing I did want to respond to in the questions, and I put it in the chat, but just to let you know that many companies offer paid internships in a variety of areas. So it's not necessarily just in one. And they do it because they do understand that there are, you know, entry-level people out there. Quite often they're time limited, but if you do a good job and you really enjoy it and you develop your relationships in that company, it quite often leads to a full-time opportunity. And I can tell you that we have had many, many, many hires that were originally completing interns.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Angela also wants to say something.
Actually, this is something, Tammy, I would love to partner with you on, because what I would love to do and what I think this industry could really use is a list of those organizations.
Yes.
Because I do believe the biggest challenge that we have that's relating to the fraudulence and the desperations and the poaching and all of the resignations is that the lack of clear path starts with, who do I apply to? How do I compete to even get into a training program? What institutions or organizations should I go to? What sponsors offer internships? If we had just come up with an industry list to where people feel confident that if we go look at this list, that this is a starting point, I think that would be a game changer for us.
I think that's very valuable.
Yeah.
And I also think that is also needed in South Africa. What sites are prepared to take interns, and what are you going to train them on? So that is something definitely needed by the industry to help the people that did a course to go and get some ground work done at sites or clinical research organizations. There's also somebody that says that they've done a GCP course. I'm really interested in the accreditation program. Do you think that I should take the clinical trial lifecycle course? Thank you for this. I do not know what GCP course you attended. There are many out there. And what I can say is that depending on where you stay, or if you're in South Africa or overseas, just regarding the good clinical practice, in South Africa, I've seen a lot of people doing this free GCP courses. I'm not going to say the name. Be careful of those. Especially if you are in South Africa, there are free overseas online GCP courses, but that does not include South African SAGCP principles. Our course covers globally. Our course covers ICH GCP, and there's a section, should you need to, and be in South Africa, do this section on South African GCP. It is very important that you do that, otherwise you will not be accepted and approved by our regulatory board. Also, we call this the foundation and beyond the clinical research journey, because we go beyond GCP. We just do not teach the knowledge, we do the application of GCP at the site. And we fully prepare you, because we are, the course was quality assured by IAOCR. We know that we prepare you for their accreditation exam. So I would highly recommend to do it as a combo. Ensure that you are prepared. And repetition is good. So if you recognize some of the GCP principles or something you did, I promise you this course is more than that. It teaches you the life cycle of a clinical trial. It's not just GCP, and GCP does not teach that. So I would recommend doing that as a combination. Many companies also have internship programs that are paid. Often those are time-limited jobs, but often leads to a full-time opportunity. We just discussed that, and I fully agree. We also sometimes have students that do just job shadowing for 2 months, but that is something you can put on your CV. And maybe if you were a good job shadower, we remember you. And when we need a clinical trial assistant, we call you. So anything that you do it well, do it passionate. And you will be remembered. because it's easier to go back to someone that you know and that you know that knows the company that need to start from scratch. So never let go of any opportunity. What do I look for when checking for a reputable training program? Maybe Sarah, you can tackle that.
Sure, I would say that a training organization that has been quality assured. So as Karen touched on earlier, IAOCR worked very closely with TASK to quality assure their training program, which then maps to our internationally recognized accreditation programs. So as you've mentioned, Karen, there are a lot of training programs out there. Be very careful for who you sign up for and what they guarantee you at the end. So definitely look for somebody that has been recognized internationally and is recognized from a quality standard perspective.
Thank you so much, guys. And sorry to everybody that joined. We went 20 minutes over the time, but we had so much to say. I hope that the people don't mind. It was incredibly valuable to have you, each and every one of you on this call. You really shared valuable tips, and you call a spade, and I think I like that. We need to identify if there's gaps. We need to call it out if something is wrong, and what are we going to do about it? And I think we're all here because we love this industry and we respect the industry, and therefore we want to have quality assured training and quality assured also helping with the competency and getting the right people at the job and professionalize the industry. That's what we all work towards to. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you for everybody that's online. And we will reach out to you with an email. We will send the recording and also the tips and a PDF, and we will announce the lucky winner next week soon. Bye-bye.